200 paws hit the floor before anyone saw who was coming. The building shook. File cabinets rattled. A coffee mug slid off a desk and shattered. Then the doors swung open and they poured in. Military K9s, 2 by 2, moving in absolute silence. No barking, no breaking formation, eyes forward like soldiers. Behind them, a woman in a plain gray jacket walked through the entrance of Raven Harbor Naval Processing Center and stopped. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, who 30 minutes earlier had called her 17-year-old son a liar and a fraud, stood at the end of the hallway and forgot how to breathe. If you're watching this story for the first time, hit that follow button and stay with me until the very end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning had started the way bad mornings always do, quietly, with no warning. Ethan Brooks woke up at 6:15 because his alarm didn't go off, and his body had learned not to trust sleep. He was 17, thin in the way teenagers are when they grow fast and eat inconsistently, and he had his mother's eyes, steady, watchful, not giving much away. He pulled on jeans and a hoodie that was slightly too big for him, grabbed the folder of documents off the kitchen table where his mother had left it the night before, and ate half a piece of toast standing at the counter because sitting down felt like wasting time. His mother, Olivia Brooks, had already been up for 2 hours. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that she'd said almost nothing at breakfast, which, again, wasn't that unusual either. Olivia operated on a frequency that most people didn't quite catch. She smiled at the right moments, asked the right questions, kept the house running, helped Ethan with chemistry homework when he needed it. But there were gaps in her that she never explained, rooms she didn't enter, calls she took outside, a particular stillness she went into sometimes, late at night, when she thought he wasn't watching. Ethan had spent most of his life not asking about the gaps. Today he needed her to come with him to the Naval Processing Center to sort out his dependent benefits, medication coverage primarily. He'd been diagnosed with a clotting disorder the previous spring, and the treatment wasn't cheap. His mother's military service was supposed to cover it, had always covered it in the loose, automatic way government systems work when nobody looks too closely. Except something had flagged in the system 3 weeks ago. A verification error. A file that had gone dormant for too long without the right clearances pinging the right database. He needed a human being to sit across a desk and confirm what the paperwork already said. His mother had told him she'd meet him there. She had something to handle first. He'd driven alone. Raven Harbor Naval Processing Center sat on the edge of Ashford, Oregon, close enough to the coast that you could smell salt in the parking lot on windy days. It was a mid-sized federal facility, not the kind of place that inspired awe, just the kind of place that inspired the particular misery of fluorescent lighting and plastic chairs and forms that required you to write the same information 6 different times on 6 different sheets. Ethan signed in at the front desk, got a paper number, 47, and sat down in the waiting area for 22 minutes before his number was called. The clerk who took his folder was a young woman who barely glanced at him, ran the documents through a scanner, frowned at her screen, and told him he'd need to see a processing officer. That happens sometimes with complex files, she said. Not a big deal. It became a big deal within approximately 4 minutes of sitting down across from Lieutenant Marcus Hale. Hale was in his late 30s, with the particular build of a man who had once been athletic and was working hard to maintain the impression. His uniform was pressed to the point of looking ironed while he was wearing it. He had a framed photo of himself shaking hands with someone important on his desk, positioned so visitors would see it before they saw him. He looked at the folder. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the folder again. "Olivia Brooks," he said. "Your mother." "Yes, sir." Says here she served in a classified special operations unit, Joint Task Force level, tier designation redacted. Hale tilted his head. "That's a pretty significant claim." "I know." "You know." Hale said it back like Ethan had told a joke. "How old are you?" 17. "And your mother is—" He flipped a page. "What does she do now?" "She works at a feed supply store in Millbrook, part-time." Hale looked up. Whatever expression he was wearing, it wasn't neutral. A feed supply store. Yes, sir. And before that, according to this file, she was running covert operations at a classification level that I, as a processing officer at a federal naval facility, am not authorized to view. He closed the folder with a soft, deliberate snap. You understand how that sounds? Ethan felt the first pull of something behind his sternum. Not quite anger yet. More like the awareness that this was going to be harder than it should be. I understand the file looks unusual. It doesn't look unusual. It looks fabricated. Hale leaned back in his chair. Son, I've processed thousands of dependent benefit claims. I've seen people try to stretch their eligibility before. Military records get inflated. Dates get adjusted. It happens. He paused. What doesn't happen is a tier-level redaction on a file that has no supporting chain of authorization I can locate in any system I have access to. Maybe you're not cleared to access those systems. Hale's expression shifted, not dramatically, just a slight tightening around the eyes. I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. You're just presenting a fraudulent file, Hale said, his voice dropping to something more deliberate. And I'm going to need to flag this for review, which means your benefits claim is suspended, pending investigation, which means, he picked up a pen. We're going to have a longer conversation today than either of us planned. Ethan sat very still. My medication costs $1,400 a month without coverage. That's not my problem. I have a clotting disorder. I've been on this treatment for... That is not my problem. Hale said it without blinking. What is my problem is a teenager walking in here with documents that don't hold up and expecting me to process them because his mother claims to have a classified service record that conveniently nobody can verify. He stood up. I'm going to need you to wait while I initiate a formal fraud referral. The word fraud landed like something physical. Ethan looked at the desk, at the framed photo, at the fluorescent light making everything in the room slightly too bright and slightly too flat. He thought about the folder his mother had put together. The careful way she'd organized every page, the tabs she'd made with little handwritten labels, the fact that she'd checked it twice before he left the house. He thought about how she'd looked at him over the kitchen table that morning and said, "It'll be straightforward. Just tell them the truth." He thought about all the things she'd never told him. Can I call her? He asked. You can do whatever you want while you wait. You're not under arrest. Hale picked up the folder and moved toward the door. Yet. Ethan called his mother 3 times. The first call went to voicemail. The second rang 4 times and cut off. The third was answered on the first ring by a voice he didn't recognize. Flat, professional, a woman, who said, "She'll be there soon," and disconnected. He stared at his phone. Around him, the office continued its ordinary operation. A printer hummed. Someone laughed in a hallway. A man in uniform walked past the glass partition carrying a stack of manila envelopes and didn't look in. Ethan had grown up in a specific kind of quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The waiting kind. The kind you develop when your mother sometimes disappears for 3 days and comes back with new bruises she explains away as gym accidents. When she sleeps with the bedroom door locked, and you learn not to knock after midnight. When she checks the car before she gets in, every single time, even in their own driveway, even when they've been home all day. He told himself the stories that made sense, that she was private, that she was careful, that some people were just built that way. He'd never let himself follow the other story, the one that fit better, but required him to acknowledge how little he actually knew about who she was. Hale came back 17 minutes later with a second officer, a woman named Specialist Renner, who had the resigned expression of someone asked to witness something unpleasant. We've initiated the referral, Hale said. I'm going to need a statement from you. The building shook. Not an earthquake, no lateral roll, no vertigo, just a sudden deep vibration, like something massive was moving just outside. Hale stopped mid-sentence. Renner looked at the ceiling. Through the glass partition, Ethan could see people in the outer office looking up from their screens. Then the sound started. Not sound exactly, more like the absence of the wrong sounds and the presence of one very particular right one. Synchronized footfalls, dozens of them, rhythmic and precise, moving down the main corridor toward their section of the building. Hale walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was full of dogs. Military working dogs, all of them. Belgian Malinois and German Shepherds, moving in tight 2-by-2 formation with their handlers, filling the corridor from wall to wall. They didn't bark. They didn't pull at their leads. They moved like water moving through a channel, smooth and deliberate and completely controlled. And the sound of it, over 100 sets of paws on government linoleum, was something between a drum roll and a warning. People stepped back. Not because anyone told them to. Because the body knows sometimes, when it's in the presence of something it doesn't have a category for. Hale stood in the doorway of his office with his hand still on the handle. His mouth was slightly open. At the far end of the corridor, the formation began to slow. The handlers brought their dogs to a halt with gestures rather than commands. A raised fist, a flattened palm. And the animals sat in unison, filling the hallway in both directions, watching. And then she walked in. Olivia Brooks was wearing the same gray jacket she'd had on that morning. She had the kind of face that photographs don't catch correctly, not because it was remarkable in any specific way, but because the quality of it was too quiet for a camera to register. She was 43, medium height, with hands that had done a lot of work over a lot of years, and a way of moving that covered ground without appearing to hurry. She walked through the formation, and every dog she passed turned its head to follow her, not with the anxious attention of animals seeking a command, but with something closer to recognition, like she was someone they'd been waiting for. She stopped at Hale's doorway. "Mrs. Brooks," Hale said, and then apparently could not locate what he wanted to say next. "Lieutenant." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked past him at Ethan, sitting in the chair across from the desk, and something in her face did a thing Ethan had seen before. A tiny recalibration, an internal adjustment, like she was calculating the room before she stepped into it. "Are you all right?" "Yeah," Ethan said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. She looked back at Hale. "I understand there's a problem with the file." Hale pulled himself together with visible effort. "Mrs. Brooks, I've been explaining to your son that the documentation he presented today contains claims that I'm not able to verify through any authorized channel. I've initiated a fraud referral. I heard. And I want to be clear that this is standard procedure when I'm sure it is." She stepped into the office. Not invited, not asking. She moved to the chair beside Ethan's and sat down, and the effect of her sitting down was somehow more authoritative than Hale's standing up. "Your database only shows what you're cleared to see." Hale blinked. "Excuse me?" "The records you're looking at, the ones that seem incomplete. They're incomplete because your clearance level doesn't extend to the classification tier covering my service record." She said it the way you'd explain to someone why a key doesn't fit a particular lock. No edge in it. No condescension, exactly. Just factual. "That's not a flaw in the documentation. That's the system working correctly." "With respect," Hale said, and the phrase had thorns in it. "Anyone can claim their records are classified. That's not verification. That's not a claim. It's an architecture." Olivia reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and placed a phone on Hale's desk. It was a matte black handset, nothing like a standard civilian device, with a small numerical keypad and no visible carrier branding. "When that rings, answer it." Hale looked at the phone. He looked at her. "I'm not going to—" The phone rang. Not a standard ringtone, a single flat tone, like a signal. It rang once and stopped and rang again. Hale picked it up. He listened for about 40 seconds. The color left his face with remarkable efficiency, not all at once, but in stages, like a tide going out. His posture changed, his jaw tightened. He said, "Yes, sir," twice, and then once more, very quietly, "Yes, sir," and put the phone down. He did not look at Olivia. He looked at the wall to her left, at a point roughly 3 feet to the side of her, and his hands were flat on the desk in a way that suggested he was focusing on keeping them there. "Approve the file," Olivia said. "Clear the fraud referral. Process the full benefits package." "Yes," Hale said. Ethan sat in his chair and watched his mother and the careful, quiet, ordinary woman he had spent 17 years trying to understand began, without moving a single muscle, to become someone else entirely. Hale's keyboard clicked. Outside the glass partition, through the open door, the K9 formation remained completely still. Over 100 dogs sitting in a government hallway in the middle of a Tuesday, waiting. Nobody in the outer office was pretending to work anymore. They were all watching, the way people watch when something outside their comprehension is happening at close range. Specialist Renner had removed herself from the doorway at some point. Ethan hadn't noticed when. "I'll need a few minutes to process the reversal of the referral," Hale said. His voice had lost its earlier quality, the slight elevation of a man performing authority. It was flat now, functional. "Take the time you need," Olivia said. Ethan looked at her sideways. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, watching Hale work, and the angle of her profile was one he knew from thousands of ordinary moments. Breakfast, homework, the passenger seat of the truck on drives to the coast. But the context had shifted everything. He thought about the scar on the back of her left forearm. She'd always said she caught it on a fence wire when she was a teenager, and he'd accepted that because he'd been 8 when she told him, and he hadn't yet started counting the ways the story didn't quite fit. The scar was too clean for fence wire, too deliberate in its path. He thought about the winter when he was 12 and she'd disappeared for 11 days. She'd said it was a family emergency on her sister's side. He'd met her sister once, briefly, a woman named Ruth who lived in Idaho and seemed deeply uncomfortable around Olivia in a way Ethan had never analyzed. The emergency had never been mentioned again. He thought about the nightmares. Not her nightmares. He'd never actually heard her having one. Just the evidence of them. The way she'd be in the kitchen at 3 a.m. when he got up for water, standing at the window with the lights off, and she'd turn around and there'd be a half second where she looked like she was still somewhere else. Somewhere with a different kind of dark before she came back to him. She always came back to him. "Mom," he said, keeping his voice low. She looked at him. "How many are there? Outside?" She thought about it for a beat. 212. Including the handlers. "Why?" He stopped, restarted. "Why that many?" Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile, more like the near miss of one. "Because that's how many were available on short notice." The implication settled over him like water. Short notice. As in she'd made calls this morning. As in when she'd said she had something to handle first, this was what she'd handled. "You knew he was going to do this," Ethan said. "I knew there was a possibility. You planned for it." "I planned for possibilities." She looked back at Hale's screen. "It's a habit." "What?" The fraud referral reversal took 9 minutes. Hale printed a form, initialed it, stamped it, scanned it, and sent a digital copy to 3 different addresses that Olivia provided from memory. Not from her phone, not from a piece of paper, from memory, rattling off secure email addresses with department extensions the way a person recites their own birthday. Hale did not comment on this. When it was done, he set the printed copy on the edge of the desk facing Ethan without looking at either of them. "The referral has been reversed. The benefits file is active. Full coverage, retroactive 30 days. He cleared his throat. "The fraud notation has been removed from the record. There will be there's nothing outstanding against the account." "And the formal apology?" Olivia said. There was a pause. Hale began, "To my son." She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the printed form on the desk. "He came in here with properly assembled documentation, and you called him a liar in front of a witness. You used the word fraud in reference to his family. You told him his medication costs were," she quoted him back to himself without any particular inflection, "not your problem." She let that sit for a moment. Ethan is 17. He has a medical condition. He did everything correctly. You made it harder than it needed to be because you made an assumption, and the assumption was wrong. Hale's jaw worked. He looked at Ethan, actually looked at him, maybe for the first time. "I apologize for how I spoke to you today. He stopped. "I'm sorry." Ethan didn't say it was fine. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once, which was enough, and picked up the printed form from the edge of the desk. Olivia stood. Outside the glass partition, the K9 formation shifted. Not a dramatic movement, just the subtle collective adjustment of a unit that had registered a change in status. Several handlers looked toward the doorway. Several dogs turned their heads. Hale watched all of this from behind his desk, and for the first time in the interaction, he looked like what he was, a man who had made a significant mistake and was now understanding the full dimensions of it. "Mrs. Brooks," he said. She paused in the doorway. "The admiral who called—" Hale stopped himself, started again, differently. "Your service, was any of it—" "The file will remain classified," she said. "Have a good afternoon, Lieutenant." She walked back into the hallway and the dogs nearest her turned their heads as she passed, and Ethan followed her out into the corridor, into that extraordinary silent assemblage of animals and handlers, and the whole impossible morning began to close behind him like water over a stone. He'd gotten what he came for. He had the form in his hand. His medications would be covered. But walking through that hallway, past those dogs that watched his mother with something that looked like loyalty and something that looked like reverence, he understood that he had also arrived at the edge of something he hadn't known existed. A version of his mother that the gray jacket and the feed store and the ordinary Tuesdays had kept carefully out of view. He thought about all 17 years, every gap, every locked door, every 3 a.m. window. He thought about how she'd said short notice and what that meant about the size of the network she could reach in a single morning before breakfast was finished. They pushed through the main doors and the Oregon air hit them. Salt and cool, off the water. The convoy of vehicles that hadn't been in the parking lot when Ethan arrived were there now. 3 dark SUVs and a transport van, parked in a configuration that blocked both exit lanes. Olivia stopped on the steps. She didn't turn around, but Ethan had the distinct sense she was listening to something behind them, some frequency in the building they'd just left, some change in the pattern. "Mom," he said. Inside, when you put the phone down, he was choosing his words carefully, the way you do when you're not sure how much truth you're about to walk into. He said, "Yes, sir," 3 times. "I know." "Who was on the phone?" She was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "Someone who outranks him by a considerable distance," she said finally. Ethan looked at the SUVs, at the transport van, at 2 handlers standing near the vehicle doors, waiting, their dogs sitting in perfect position at their heels. "How considerable?" he asked. She looked at him then, and there was something in her face he'd never seen before. Or maybe he had, in parts, in pieces, in 3 a.m. windows. Something that was equal parts apology and pride, and something much older than either. Before she could answer, the main doors behind them opened, and Specialist Renner stepped out, her face taut with the specific expression of someone who has just received information they were not prepared to receive. "Mrs. Brooks." Her voice was controlled. Barely. "Lieutenant Hale has just been informed that military investigators are en route to this facility. They're asking if you filed a conduct report." Olivia reached into her jacket pocket. Not the phone this time. A small, folded document, which she handed to Renner without expression. Renner unfolded it, read it, looked up. "When did you file this?" she asked. "Yesterday evening," Olivia said. "When I received confirmation my son had been denied and referred for fraud without cause." Renner stared at the document. "The investigators were all ready, before you even came in today." "Yes." Renner looked at the convoy, at the dogs filing back out of the building 2 by 2, returning to the vehicles with the same precision they'd arrived with. At Olivia Brooks standing on the steps in a gray jacket with her hands in her pockets, and her face carrying the absolute composure of someone who had stopped being surprised by the world a very long time ago. "He didn't know," Renner said. It wasn't a question. "He had no idea who you were when your son came in this morning." "No," Olivia said. "He didn't." A black SUV pulled to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door without being asked. Olivia looked at Ethan. "Let's go," she said. And Ethan, who had 17 years of questions lined up behind his teeth, looked at the document still in Renner's hands, at the investigators already on their way, at his mother standing at the bottom of those steps like the still point of everything turning, and got in the car. Behind them, inside the building, Lieutenant Marcus Hale sat at his desk and waited for the knock on his door that he already knew was coming. The SUV smelled like clean upholstery and something faintly chemical, not unpleasant, just the particular scent of a vehicle that had been maintained to a standard beyond ordinary use. Ethan sat in the back seat with the printed benefits form on his knee and watched the Naval Processing Center disappear in the side mirror. It got smaller quickly. The convoy moved at a consistent pace, not fast enough to draw attention, and nobody spoke for the first several minutes. He kept waiting for someone to explain something. Nobody did. The driver, a woman in her 30s with short hair and the particular economy of movement that Ethan was beginning to recognize as a pattern, kept her eyes on the road. Olivia sat beside him and looked out the window at the Oregon coastline running parallel to the highway, gray-green water beyond the shoulder, clouds low and uniform. She looked like she was thinking about something specific, working it through, and Ethan had learned long ago that interrupting that process accomplished nothing useful. He looked at the form instead, his name, his date of birth, his diagnosis, his coverage tier. His mother's service designation, still redacted in 3 places, black bars over information that the form acknowledged existed but declined to reproduce. He'd never noticed those redactions before because there'd never been a reason to look closely. He looked at them now. "There are 4 redactions on this form," he said. "5," Olivia said without turning from the window. "The 4th section header is also redacted. Most people miss it." Ethan found it. She was right. "What does it say?" "If you were supposed to know, it wouldn't be redacted." "Mom, that's not deflection. That's literally how the system works." She turned to look at him then, and her expression was the one she used when she was being precise rather than evasive. "There are things I can't tell you. Not won't, can't. The classification doesn't expire because I'm sitting in a car with my son. It doesn't work that way." "I know how classification works." "Do you?" "Theoretically." "Then you know that what I can tell you is limited, and what I'm choosing to tell you tonight, at home, at the kitchen table, is going to be more than I've told you in 17 years combined." She paused. "That's not nothing." Ethan considered this. The coastline moved past. A pelican dropped out of the cloud cover and angled toward the water with the total confidence of something that had done this 10,000 times. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight." He leaned back and let that sit. It wasn't satisfaction. There was too much friction in him for satisfaction. But it was a fixed point, something to navigate toward. Outside, the convoy was already splitting. One of the black SUVs had taken a different road at the last junction, and the transport van had slowed and pulled into a rest area. Ethan watched them separate in the mirror. The convoy, which had seemed enormous inside the building, was quietly distributing itself back into the landscape. "Where are they going?" he asked. "Where they're needed," Olivia said. She asked the driver to drop them at a pharmacy on the way back into Millbrook. Not a chain. A small independent place on the corner of 2 streets that had probably existed since before Ethan was born, with a hand-painted sign and a parking lot that held 6 cars if everyone was thoughtful about it. The driver pulled to the curb and Olivia said something brief to her that Ethan didn't catch, and then they were on the sidewalk watching the SUV pull away. Ordinary. Just like that. His mother held the door open for an elderly man coming out with a paper bag, and the man said thank you, and she said, "Of course." And they went inside. The pharmacist knew her by name. Of course he did. He was a man in his 60s named Bert, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and called Ethan young man, and had apparently been filling prescriptions for their family since Ethan was 4. He looked at the printed form, looked at his computer, made a small satisfied noise, and said the full 6-month supply would be ready in 20 minutes. They sat in the 2 plastic chairs near the blood pressure machine and waited. Ethan looked at his mother in the ordinary fluorescent light of the pharmacy, next to the rotating display of reading glasses and the end cap of compression socks, and tried to reconcile the 2 images in his head. The woman who'd walked through 200 dogs without hurrying, who'd placed a phone on a lieutenant's desk like a quiet detonation, who had filed a conduct report the night before as casually as paying a bill. And this woman, who is currently reading the back of a vitamin D bottle with the mild interest of someone who has nothing in particular to do for 20 minutes. "You filed the report before you even knew how bad it was going to be," he said. "I filed it when I confirmed the denial." She put the vitamin D back on the shelf. "Ethan, what he did to you, calling it fraud, threatening investigation, that wasn't a unique behavior. People like that don't do something like that once. They do it until something stops them." She picked up a different bottle, examined it. I was the something. But how did you know the investigators were already? I called in a request when I filed the report. Expedited review, given the nature of my file and the specific authority I carry on dependent benefit matters. She set the second bottle down. I've been in enough situations where waiting for standard procedure meant something worse happened first. You don't wait when you don't have to. Ethan thought about that. How many times have you done something like this? Not specifically this, but this kind of thing. Showing up, making a problem go away. She was quiet for a moment. A few. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have right now. He let it go. Not because he was satisfied, but because the pharmacy was small and Bert was 12 feet away, and this wasn't the conversation for a public space. He'd waited 17 years. He could wait another hour. The prescription came up in 18 minutes. Bert walked through the cost breakdown, confirmed the insurance was active, wished Ethan good health with the particular sincerity of a man who had been doing this long enough to mean it. Olivia paid for a bottle of multivitamins she didn't need because she always bought something small when they came in, a habit Ethan had never thought to question. Outside, the afternoon had gone grayer. There was weather moving in off the coast. Not a storm exactly, just that compressed Pacific pressure that made the light wrong and the air heavy. Olivia called a car. Not the convoy. Just an ordinary rideshare, same app he used himself. The driver was a college student who played music too loud through one earbud and asked no questions. Normal. Deliberately, carefully normal. Ethan watched his mother pay on her phone, scroll briefly through something, put it away. In the reflection of the car window, her face was composed and slightly tired, and for the first time all day he could see the tiredness. "Were you scared?" he asked. "Going in there." She didn't answer immediately. "I was focused." "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "It's not." The house was the same house it had always been. Two-bedroom rental in a neighborhood that had stopped updating itself sometime around 2003, with a front porch that needed repainting and a yard that Ethan mowed because Olivia traveled enough that consistent lawn maintenance was impossible. There was a wind chime that had belonged to someone they'd rented from before, and Olivia had never taken it down. She made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. She took the chair across from him, wrapped both hands around her mug and said, "Ask." So he did. He started with the easy ones. The ones he'd already half-answered for himself over the years. How long she'd served. Where. Whether the deployments he barely remembered were what he thought they were. She answered those. She'd served for 19 years. The first 4, conventional military. She named the branch, the base, the duties, the boring parts of it. Then a recruitment process she described as unusual and thorough and lasting almost a year. Then the work that followed, which she described in terms of geography and duration, but not in terms of what happened in those places. Eastern European border regions. Parts of Central Asia. 3 separate deployments to locations whose names were themselves classified, which she acknowledged with a kind of professional absurdity. "I can tell you I was in a place that I can't tell you the name of. For a duration I can tell you in general terms. Doing work I can describe only in broad categories." "Broad categories," Ethan said. "Assessment. Response. Occasionally prevention." Prevention of what? Of things becoming worse than they already were. He thought about that for a long time. "The scars," he said. She looked at her left arm. "Some of them have good stories. Most of them have stories I'd rather not repeat." "The fence wire." She met his eyes. "I'm sorry about that one." "Why a fence wire?" "You were 8. You just learned about hospitals, and you were already anxious. I needed something boring." "I'm 17 now." "I know." She turned the mug in her hands. "I know." He looked at her forearm, at the scar he'd studied his whole life and filed under fence wire because the alternative had been too large a door to open. "Were you in combat?" "Yes." "Were you ever—" He stopped. This was the door he'd avoided. This was exactly it. "Were you ever in a situation where you might not have come back?" She took a long breath. "Several." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. The wind chime moved outside. "That winter when I was 12, he said, "you were gone 11 days. She closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, she looked at the table between them rather than at him. That was a difficult deployment. The extraction was delayed. She paused. I was injured, not critically, but enough that returning to regular life required some adjustment time that I spent at a facility rather than at home. You were injured? Yes. And you came home and told me your sister had a family emergency? Yes. He wasn't angry. That surprised him. He'd expected anger if he ever got to this room, this table, this conversation. But what he actually felt was more like standing at the edge of a very deep thing and finally being allowed to look down. Why didn't you tell me? He said. Not then. I was 12. But later, when I was older. She looked at him directly then, and the tiredness he'd seen in the car window was fully present now. Not weakness, just the weight of a long time carrying something carefully. Because every time I thought about telling you, she said, I imagined you knowing. And then I imagined the next time I had to leave, and what your face would look like knowing what you knew. She pressed her mouth together for a moment. I was a coward about it. That's the honest answer. I told myself I was protecting you, and I probably was. But I was also protecting myself from watching you be afraid. He sat with that. I was afraid anyway, he said, the whole time. I know. She said it very quietly. I know you were. Dike. He went to bed earlier than he usually did, not because he was tired, but because there was a limit to how much truth a person could process in a single afternoon. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling and listened to his mother in the kitchen, the sound of her washing the mugs, putting them away, moving through the house with the particular economy of a person who had learned not to make noise. He thought about the dogs, 212 of them, moving through a government building in total silence because she'd asked them to. He thought about the phone and whoever was on the other end, and the sound of Hale saying yes sir 3 times with all the confidence leaving his voice like air from a punctured tire. He thought about 19 years of service, about assessment and response and prevention of things becoming worse, about the 11 days when he was 12, and the facility she described with a word that could mean a dozen different things. He was asleep before he heard her door close. The next morning was Thursday, and Ethan had school, which felt almost violent in its absurdity. But Olivia was up making eggs when he came downstairs, and she handed him a plate, and they ate together with the news on low in the background, and the ordinary morning was doing the thing ordinary mornings do, absorbing everything, flattening it, making even the extraordinary things feel slightly less than real in the particular amnesia of routine. He was halfway through breakfast when his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. Oregon area code, but not one of his contacts. He showed it to his mother. She looked at it for 1 second longer than casual. Answer it, she said. He did. The voice on the other end was male, middle-aged, precise. Is this Ethan Brooks? Yes. My name is Agent Doyle. I'm with the Naval Investigative Standards Office. I spoke briefly with your mother yesterday. A short pause. I'm calling to inform you that the formal disciplinary proceeding against Lieutenant Hale was initiated this morning. As a party of interest in the initial incident, you'll receive official notification by mail within 3 business days. I wanted to make sure you were aware before that arrives. Ethan looked at his mother across the kitchen table. She was cutting her eggs and not looking at him. Okay, he said. Thank you. One more thing, Doyle said. During the course of our preliminary review of Lieutenant Hale's processing record, we identified 17 additional cases over the past 4 years where similar conduct may have occurred. Denial of legitimate claims, fraud designations without evidentiary basis, coercive interviewing of claimants. He paused again, and the pause had weight to it. Your son's case is the one that opened that review. I thought you should know that. Ethan lowered the phone. Olivia looked up. 17 cases, he said. She set down her fork. What else? Disciplinary proceedings started this morning. He put the phone face down on the table. He said my case opened the review. She was quiet for a moment, and he watched something move through her face. Not satisfaction exactly, but something close to resolution, like a knot releasing that had been under tension for a long time. Eat your eggs, she said. Mom, I know. She picked up her fork again. Eat your eggs. He ate his eggs. He was scraping the last of them off the plate when the front window went dark. Just briefly, just the passage of something large moving past the glass. He turned to look and saw the black SUV parked at the curb outside their house. The same model as yesterday, same configuration, different plates. Olivia saw it too. Her posture didn't change. Her expression didn't change. But she set her fork down and reached into the pocket of her bathrobe, and her hand came back holding her phone, and she looked at the screen for 3 seconds with an expression that Ethan had no name for. "Stay here," she said. "What?" "Inside. Don't come to the door." She was already standing. "I mean it, Ethan." She walked to the front door in her bathrobe and bare feet with the absolute composure of someone who has answered unexpected knocks at unexpected hours in far more dangerous circumstances than a residential street in Millbrook, Oregon. Ethan stayed at the kitchen table for approximately 4 seconds. Then he moved to the hallway where he could see the door without being seen through the window. She opened it. 2 people on the porch, a man and a woman, both in civilian clothes, both with the posture that was becoming a pattern he could recognize now. The man held credentials. The woman held a flat document case. "Mrs. Brooks," the man said, "I'm sorry to come to your home. We weren't able to reach you by phone." "My phone was on," Olivia said. "Yes, we were told not to use the number we had." He said it carefully, like this was a detail he was still processing. "We were told to come in person." "By whom?" The woman with the document case said, "Admiral Farron." Olivia said nothing. "He'd like to speak with you," the man said. "In person, today if possible. There's—" He glanced at the case the woman was holding. "There's a matter that's come up, related to your record, and to something that occurred yesterday at the processing center." Another careful pause. "He said to tell you it's not about Hale. He said you'd understand the distinction." Olivia stood in the doorway for a moment that stretched. Then she said, "Give me 15 minutes." She closed the door and turned and found Ethan standing in the hallway, and she looked at him for a moment with an expression he didn't know how to read. Something between resolve and something much older, much more complicated, that he was only just beginning to have the vocabulary for. "Mom," he said, "what's not about Hale?" She looked past him, toward the kitchen window, toward the gray morning light coming through it. "There's a file," she said. "One I thought was sealed permanently." She stopped, started differently. "There's something from a deployment 8 years ago that I understood had been resolved, closed, archived." The composure she always carried was still there, but underneath it, for the first time, Ethan could see the shape of something that wasn't composure at all. Apparently it hasn't been. What kind of something? She met his eyes. "The kind," she said, "that doesn't stay buried even when you bury it correctly." Ethan watched her go upstairs to change and stood in the hallway for a moment with the particular stillness of someone who has just had the floor shift under them without moving. The kind that doesn't stay buried even when you bury it correctly. He went back to the kitchen and put his plate in the sink and ran the water over it and tried to organize what he knew into something with edges. What he had, a sealed file, 8 years old, that apparently wasn't sealed. An admiral who wanted to speak with her in person today. 2 agents on the porch who'd been told not to use the phone they had and to come in person instead. His mother, who had spent 19 years acquiring the kind of composure that didn't crack, and who, for exactly 3 seconds in that hallway, had shown him something underneath it that looked a great deal like dread. He turned off the water. She came downstairs in 11 minutes. He timed it without meaning to. In clean clothes, hair pulled back, the gray jacket replaced with a dark navy one. She looked like herself. She looked like the version of herself he didn't fully know yet. "I need you to go to school," she said. "I'm not going to school." "Ethan, Mom," he said it flatly, without heat. "Whatever is in that file, you told me last night that you were going to start telling me the truth. That started last night. It doesn't stop this morning because something inconvenient came up." She looked at him for a moment. She picked her keys up off the counter and put them in her pocket, and then put them back on the counter because they weren't driving themselves. The agents were waiting, small tells. He'd never known what to make of them before. You can come as far as the facility, she said. You wait outside, not in the room. Okay. I mean it, not in the room. I heard you. She picked up her keys again and this time kept them. Let's go. The facility wasn't what he expected. He'd pictured something coastal and fortified. Chain link, guard posts, the visual grammar of military authority. What they pulled up to was a converted office complex on the northern edge of Ashford, 3 stories of glass and concrete that had probably been a tech company's regional hub before some federal agency acquired it. The signage was minimal. 2 cameras above the entrance, visible enough to be deliberate. A single guard at the exterior booth who checked credentials with practiced efficiency. The female agent, her name was Vasquez, she'd introduced herself in the car, had given Ethan a temporary visitor pass that authorized him access to the lobby and the second-floor waiting area. No further. He sat in the waiting area on a chair that was more comfortable than government furniture usually was, and watched his mother walk through a frosted glass door with Vasquez and the male agent, whose name was Doyle, the same Doyle from the phone call, which seemed like either coincidence or efficiency, and with these people Ethan was starting to assume efficiency. The door closed. He had his phone, a half-charged battery, and no idea how long this would take. He didn't look at his phone. He looked at the frosted glass instead, at the shapes moving behind it, indistinct, purposeful, and tried to build a picture of the deployment 8 years ago from the pieces his mother had given him. 8 years ago, he'd been 9. He tried to remember what 9 had looked like. The apartment in Grants Pass they'd been renting then, smaller than the current place. His mother working at a shipping logistics company, evening shifts, which he now understood wasn't what it had been. Whether she'd been away that year, he couldn't place it with certainty. The specific shape of absence was hard to hold in memory when absence had been such a consistent feature of the landscape. What he could remember from that year with more clarity than most. A phone call she'd taken in the bathroom with the door locked for 45 minutes. Coming out after, with her eyes slightly red, which she'd attributed to allergies. Making dinner with the particular focused efficiency of someone redirecting themselves. Helping him with a school project about Pacific Northwest geography. He'd done the Olympic Peninsula. She'd cut out photographs from a magazine and helped him glue them to the poster board, and her hands had been completely steady. Whatever the phone call had been about, she'd put it away and helped him glue photographs. He thought about what kind of person that required you to be. Inside, the room Olivia had been shown to was smaller than meeting rooms usually were for the level of conversation it was being asked to hold. A table, 6 chairs, a window overlooking the facility's rear parking structure. Admiral Warren Farron was already seated when she entered. Late 60s, the compact build of a career officer, the particular kind of stillness that accumulates in people who have spent decades in positions of significant authority. He stood when she came in, which was a choice that communicated something. "Olivia," he said. "Admiral." She sat without being invited to, which was a choice that communicated something back. Vasquez and Doyle took chairs near the wall. The document case was on the table, unopened. Farron sat. He looked at her for a moment with the evaluating quality of a man assembling something. "How's the boy?" "He's good. He's outside." "I know. We have him on the lobby camera." He said it without apology. 17 now. "Yes." "Growing up." He put his hand on the document case but didn't open it yet. "I want to say something before we get into the file. What happened at the processing center yesterday? You handled it correctly. Hale's conduct review is moving forward. The 17 secondary cases are being audited, and the report you filed gave us the authority to move faster than we would have been able to otherwise." He paused. "You didn't have to do it that way. You could have made one call and had the whole thing resolved in an hour." "I know. Why didn't you?" She looked at him steadily. "Because making one call and having it resolved in an hour doesn't stop him from doing it again. The report does." Farron nodded slowly. "That's why I wanted you in person for this." He opened the case. The document he set on the table was not a single page. It was a bound file, maybe 40 pages, with a classification header across the cover that Olivia looked at without expression. She recognized the designation. Of course she did. She'd spent 3 years of her life inside that designation. "Operation Crestline," Farron said. She was quiet. The file was supposed to be sealed under the standard dormancy protocol. 7 years, then permanent archive, no review triggers. He turned the cover page. It got flagged 18 days ago by a cross-reference audit. Routine system maintenance, nothing targeted. The flag kicked it to a review desk, and the analyst who pulled it noticed a procedural anomaly in the field reporting from the final stage of the operation. What anomaly? The extraction report lists 6 personnel recovered. He looked at her. The operational roster shows 7 deployed. The room was quiet enough that the HVAC system was audible. There were 6 recovered, Olivia said. I know what you're going to say. Then you already know what I'm going to tell you. I need to hear it on record. He nodded toward a small recording device on the table that she'd already noticed when she sat down. For the file. For the audit. She looked at the recorder. She looked at the file. She thought about her son in the waiting area upstairs, and the 9-year-old who'd helped cut photographs out of a magazine and the phone call she'd taken in the bathroom for 45 minutes because she couldn't do it in front of him. The 7th personnel was Sergeant Dale Morrow, she said. He was declared KYA on day 11 of the operation. His remains were not recoverable due to the nature of the extraction environment. The 6-person count on the final report reflects those recovered alive. The discrepancy isn't an anomaly. It's a documentation error in how the recovery count was coded against the deployment roster. Someone coded recovered personnel as total personnel accounted for, rather than separating the KYA designation. That's consistent with what the analyst found, Farron said, but the audit flagged something else. He turned to a page near the middle of the file. Morrow's casualty report lists the cause as operational environment hazard, indirect fire. He looked up. Your field report, the one you submitted from the extraction point before the team was out, lists the cause differently. She didn't answer. Your field report, Farron continued, which was the first documentation submitted and which was subsequently superseded by the casualty report filed by the mission commanding officer, lists the cause as friendly coordination failure. He set the page down. That's a significant discrepancy. Yes, she said. The mission CO at the time was Major Peter Weiland, who is now Colonel Peter Weiland, currently assigned to the Pacific Fleet Logistics Command in... I know where Weiland is. Farron was quiet for a moment. Did he know about your field report? He's the one who told me it had been superseded. And you accepted that. She looked at him. Weiland outranked me by 2 grades. The mission was classified. The operation was over. Dale Morrow was dead, and superseding my field report wasn't going to bring him back. She kept her voice even with effort. I accepted it because the alternative was a formal challenge against a superior officer on a classified operation, which would have taken 2 years, would have ended my career, and would have resulted in the same outcome for Dale either way. She paused. I accepted it because I had a 9-year-old at home, and I was trying to survive the year. Farron didn't look away. I understand. Do you? I'm not here to relitigate your decision, he said. I'm here because the audit found your original report, the superseded one, and because the analyst who flagged it ran a background search on all personnel listed in the operation and found that your name came up in an unrelated processing center incident 48 hours ago. He closed the file, which brought it to my desk. She stared at the table between them. Weiland, she said, will be notified that the audit has flagged an inconsistency in the Crestline documentation, Farron said carefully. That's the procedural step. And then? And then there's an investigation. He folded his hands on the file, which will be led by someone who has no prior relationship with Weiland or with the Pacific Fleet Command structure. He looked at her steadily. And which will include your original field report as primary documentation. The weight of that settled over her like a slow tide. 8 years. She'd carried the specific shape of that 11 days for 8 years. Not just the extraction delay, not just the injury, but the particular acid of knowing that Dale Morrow's death had been written as something it wasn't, and that she'd signed off on the silence because she hadn't had the resources left to fight it and survive. She'd told herself it was pragmatism. She'd told herself it was for Ethan. Both things had been true, and neither one had made it sit any better in the years since. I want to be clear about something, she said. Go ahead. This investigation, whatever it finds, however it resolves, I need it to reflect accurately on Dale, not on me, not on my service record, not on my field report being right or wrong, on Dale Morrow's casualty record specifically, on how his death is classified and recorded. She looked at Farron directly. He has a daughter. She was 6 when he died. She's 14 now. She deserves to know her father didn't die because of an environment hazard. She deserves the accurate record. Farron looked at her for a long moment. That's all you want. That's the first thing I want. And the second? The investigation needs to go where the evidence goes, even if that's somewhere uncomfortable. She said it without particular heat, just the flatness of someone stating a fact. Weiland made a decision to supersede that report. He knew what my report said. Whatever his reasons were, he chose to replace an accurate document with an inaccurate one. That's not a paperwork error. That's a choice. She stood. I made my choice 8 years ago, and I've lived with it. He should make peace with his. Ethan was still in the waiting area when she came back through the frosted glass door. He read her correctly from across the room in about 3 seconds. Not distressed, not relieved, somewhere in between, the particular state of a person who has just put down something heavy and isn't yet sure how their body feels without it. Okay? He said. Not exactly. She picked up her jacket from the chair beside him. But not okay. That's helpful. I know. She looked at him, and the tired thing was back, but it was different now. Less like weight, and more like the aftermath of weight. The difference between carrying something and having set it down. I'll explain in the car. Most of it. Most of it. The parts I can. She touched his shoulder briefly, the kind of quick contact that was less affection than confirmation. He's here, I'm here, we're both still standing. Come on. Vasquez drove them home. She didn't ask questions, and Olivia offered no information, and the 40-minute drive happened mostly in silence, with the gray Oregon sky pressing down on the coast road and the ocean occasionally visible between headlands, iron-colored and flat. Olivia told him about Dale Morrow in general terms. The deployment, the extraction, the specific shape of what had gone wrong and how it had been recorded wrong and what she'd done with that knowledge for 8 years. She didn't tell him what the operation had been or what its objectives were, or most of the operational specifics. She told him the human part of it, a soldier who had died and had been recorded inaccurately, a decision she'd made in the aftermath that she'd spent a long time not being able to fully look at, a 14-year-old girl somewhere who had a casualty file about her father that said the wrong thing. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she was done, they were back on their street, parked in front of the house. Vasquez stayed in the car. The engine idled. You've been carrying this for 8 years, Ethan said. Yes. And now there's an investigation. Yes. He thought about it. The man who changed the report. Weiland. What happens to him? The investigation goes where it goes. That's not an answer. She turned to look at him. It's the honest answer. I don't know what they'll find. I know what my report said. I know what his report said. What happens between those two documents and whatever authority gets to adjudicate them. She shook her head slightly. I've been in enough of these processes to know that wanting a specific outcome and getting a specific outcome aren't the same thing. But your report was right. I believe it was. Then he should be held accountable. Yes, she said simply. He should. She reached for the door handle. Whether he is, that's not something I control. What I controlled was choosing, today, to put my original account on record, after 8 years. She paused with her hand on the handle. That's enough for right now. They went inside. The afternoon moved in the strange, muffled way that high-stakes days sometimes do in their quieter stretches. Not slow, exactly, just muted. Olivia made phone calls from the back porch with the door half closed. Ethan did the homework he'd missed that morning, sitting at the kitchen table with his textbook open and his mind processing 2 separate streams simultaneously. The chemistry was automatic. The other stream was less organized. He thought about Dale Morrow's daughter, 14, somewhere with a file that said the wrong thing about her father. He thought about his mother on a porch in Oregon making careful, quiet phone calls that would move things he'd never see moved. He thought about Hale and the 17 cases and the fraud referral that had started all of this. He'd come to the processing center yesterday to get medication coverage. He'd walked into a bureaucratic ugliness that had existed long before he arrived. In the chain that followed, his mother's conduct report, the investigators, the dormant file, the admiral, the audit. All of it connected back to a Tuesday morning when a lieutenant had called a 17-year-old a liar and thought there would be no consequence. There was always a chain. He was just now old enough to see the whole length of it. 3 days passed. Olivia went back to work at the feed supply store on Friday, which seemed almost aggressively ordinary given the week. She came home smelling like sawdust and livestock supplement, made dinner, asked about his chemistry test, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. The investigators called twice. She took both calls in the back porch with the door closed. She told him after the second one that the Crestline audit had been formally elevated to a full investigation, that Weiland had been notified and had retained legal counsel, and that Dale Morrow's casualty file had been flagged for revision pending the investigation's outcome. Flagged for revision, Ethan said. Not revised. Not yet. Process takes time. How much time? Months, probably. Maybe longer. She said it without frustration, which he found more unsettling than frustration would have been, like she'd made peace with a pace she had no control over. These things move on their own schedule. He nodded. He'd been thinking about something all week and hadn't said it yet. The timing, he said. My benefits claim. If I hadn't gone in Tuesday, if Hale hadn't flagged it, if you hadn't filed the conduct report, the audit still would have run, she said. The cross-reference is automatic. The file would still have been flagged. But it wouldn't have come to Farron the same way. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. Probably not. So Hale being wrong about me, about the fraud, that's actually what connected the dots. Hale being wrong and you showing up when you did and me making the choices I made. She picked up her mug. Don't look for clean causation. Life isn't architecture. You sound like you're telling yourself that as much as you're telling me. She gave him a look that was somewhere between exasperated and something warmer. Go to bed, Ethan. He went. He was asleep by 10:30, which was early for him. He didn't hear his mother's phone go off at 11:47. He didn't hear her take the call in the kitchen instead of the porch because the night had gotten cold and the kitchen was closer. He didn't hear the shift in her voice when she understood what she was being told, a specific kind of quiet, the kind she used when absorbing something significant, keeping the reaction internal until she'd processed it enough to handle. He didn't hear any of it. What he heard at 6:04 the next morning was his mother's voice at his door. Ethan? Just his name, but something in the register of it, controlled, deliberate, brought him out of sleep immediately. Get up. Get dressed. Something's happened. He was in the kitchen in 3 minutes, still pulling his second sleeve on. Olivia was at the table with her phone in front of her and a look on her face that he couldn't fully read. Tight, pale, the particular expression of someone managing something serious without all the information they needed. What happened? He said. Weiland, she said. He drove to his office on the base last night, after hours. He removed files, physical files, from a locked storage cabinet. The MP on duty flagged him but didn't have authority to stop him because he's a colonel and it was within his building access. She looked at Ethan. He's gone. Gone. His car's at the Astoria Regional Airport. His access credentials were used to board a private charter at 10:15 last night. She said it flatly, like she was reading a report. He's not on base. He's not at his residence. His wife says she hasn't spoken to him since Thursday morning. Ethan sat down slowly. He ran. He took files from the Crestline operation, and he left. She turned the phone over in her hands. Farron called 40 minutes ago. The investigation is now a federal matter. Weiland's charter filed a flight plan to Vancouver, but they lost track of the aircraft before it landed. She looked up. He planned this. Before the investigators contacted him? He was notified Thursday afternoon. He was at his attorney's office Thursday evening. And last night he went to his building and took files that, per Farron, should not have existed in physical form, documentation that should have been digitized and destroyed under protocol. She stopped. Farron thinks those files contain evidence that goes beyond the Crestline report. The kitchen was very quiet. Beyond, Ethan said. Beyond what I reported. Beyond the casualty documentation. She set the phone down and looked at the table. Farron didn't say specifically, but a colonel doesn't run from a paperwork audit. Her voice was steady in the way voices get when the steadiness is deliberate. Whatever those files contained, whatever Weiland had held onto all these years that shouldn't have existed in physical form, it's worse than I knew. Ethan looked at his mother in the early morning light of their kitchen, in the ordinary house on the ordinary street, and tried to hold the full shape of what she was telling him. She'd reported what she'd seen. She'd had her report superseded. She'd carried it for 8 years in the silence that survival required. And now the man who'd superseded it had run, had taken files that shouldn't exist and disappeared, which meant that whatever Olivia had witnessed on day 11 of Operation Crestline, whatever she'd put in her original field report, was only the surface of something. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it automatically. Unknown number. Oregon area code, but not the same one as Doyle's call 3 days ago. He picked it up. "Don't answer it," Olivia said sharply. He set it down. They both looked at it as it buzzed twice more and went to voicemail. Olivia reached across the table and picked it up and played the voicemail on speaker without touching the callback number. Static. A breath. Then a voice. Male, not young, with the particular flatness of someone choosing words under pressure. "This message is for Olivia Brooks. My name is not important. I was on the Crestline team. I know what Dale Morrow saw before he died. I know what Weiland's files contain." A pause, long enough that Ethan thought it had cut off. "I've been waiting for someone to open this for 8 years. Tell Farron I'll come in, but only if she's there." Olivia listened to the voicemail a second time. She didn't react to it the way Ethan expected. No sharp intake of breath, no visible processing of shock. She set the phone down on the table and sat with the message for about 10 seconds, in the particular stillness that he now recognized as her doing the thing she'd always done. Receiving information, sorting it, deciding what it meant and what to do with it before anyone else in the room had finished catching up. Then she picked up her own phone and called Farron. He answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd been waiting for something. She played the voicemail through her phone, held next to his, speaker to speaker, and let him listen without commentary. When it finished, Farron said, "How did they get your son's number?" "I don't know yet." "Someone on the Crestline roster, someone who's been watching the file." A pause. "Or watching you." The timing tracks. If Weiland was notified Thursday and moved Friday night, anyone else who was on that team and knew about the files would have been paying attention. She turned away from Ethan slightly. Not much, just the angle of someone thinking out loud rather than briefing. The voice is male, the phrasing, "I know what Weiland's files contain," that's specific. That's not someone who heard rumors. That's someone who has direct knowledge. Can you identify it? No, too short and too processed. There's ambient noise underneath it, sounds like wind or traffic, and whoever recorded it knew to keep it brief enough that voice analysis would be difficult. Cautious. "Careful," she said. Different thing. Farron was quiet for a moment. "If I set up a meeting, controlled environment, full security, my people in the room, would you be present?" She looked at Ethan across the table. He was watching her with the careful attention of someone tracking every variable. She thought about what she owed him, which was the truth, and what she owed Dale Morrow's daughter, which was the complete record, and what she owed the Crestline team members who had carried 8 years of the same silence she had, in whatever forms their silence had taken. "Yes," she said. "Set it up." She hung up and looked at Ethan. "You're going in again," he said. "Probably tomorrow. Farron needs to trace the number, attempt contact, prepare a secure location." She reached across and picked up his phone, looked at the unknown number on the screen. "Whoever this is, They called your number, not mine. They went through you to reach me. Why? Because my personal number is more protected than yours. They knew they couldn't reach me directly, so they found the adjacent path. She set the phone down. Which means they know your name, your number, and your connection to me. Which means they've been paying attention for at least as long as the audit has been active. That's not comforting. No. She stood and went to the counter and put the kettle on with the mechanical certainty of someone who needed a task to think alongside. But it means they have something real. People who are bluffing don't take careful, calculated approaches. They call directly. They're dramatic. She turned around. This person called your number because they wanted me to know they're close enough to find you. That's not a threat. It's a credential. They're saying, I know enough to find the edges of your life. Listen to me. Ethan thought about that. They said only if you're there. Yes, they trust you. She turned back to the kettle. Or they think I'm the only one in the process who has a specific reason to want the truth rather than a manageable version of it. The trace on the number came back in 4 hours. Prepaid device, purchased with cash at a convenience store in Seaside, Oregon, 11 days ago, 2 days before the audit flag had been formally processed, which meant someone had been anticipating the chain of events before it started. The phone had pinged 2 towers in the Clatsop County area and then gone dark, either powered off or destroyed. Doyle called with the results, and the subtext was clear in his voice. This was someone who knew how these traces worked and had taken steps accordingly. Not a scared person covering tracks badly, a competent person covering tracks deliberately. Farron called an hour after that. He'd sent a return message through the prepaid carrier to the dead number on the technical possibility that it was still active, so standard procedure, and he'd also cross-referenced the Crestline personnel roster against current locations and contact information for all surviving team members. 7 deployed. 1 KIA. That left 5 survivors besides Olivia. 2 were deceased since the operation, 1 from illness, 1 from a separate deployment 3 years later. Of the remaining 3, 1 was retired and living in Nevada, 1 was still active duty in Virginia, and 1 had left the military 4 years ago and had no current address on file. The one with no address, Olivia said. We're working on it, Farron said. Cross-reference against the Seaside area. Any financial activity, any housing, any vehicle registration in the coastal Oregon region in the last 18 months. Already running, he paused. You have someone in mind. I have an instinct, she said. Let it confirm before I name it. She was right, which she'd known she would be, and which gave her no satisfaction. The confirmation came back in 90 minutes. A rental agreement signed 14 months ago for a property 8 miles south of Seaside, paid 6 months in advance with a cashier's check, under a name that was 1 degree of separation from the real one, close enough to trace with the right tools, distant enough to avoid a casual search. Reyes. Corporal Anton Reyes, formerly of the Crestline operational team. Medical discharge 4 years ago. No fixed address on record because the address on his separation paperwork was a P.O. box in Astoria that had been closed for 3 years. He'd been 40 minutes away from Millbrook for over a year. Merquan. The meeting happened the following morning in the same converted office complex in Ashford, but a different room, larger, with 2 additional people Ethan didn't recognize seated against the wall, with the particular alertness of people whose job is to observe rather than participate. Olivia sat at the table across from an empty chair. Doyle was at one end, Vasquez at the other. Farron stood near the window with his hands clasped behind his back. Ethan was in the waiting area again. He didn't fight it this time. Anton Reyes came in without being brought in. He walked through the door at 9:47, and Olivia registered everything about him in the first 2 seconds. 46. Thinner than his service photo. A limp on the left side that had the settled quality of something old and adjusted to rather than new and compensated for. He was wearing clean clothes that were slightly too big, which was the specific fit of clothes bought at a thrift store without trying them on. He was scanning the room, not nervously, methodically. And when his eyes found Olivia, they stopped moving. He sat down across from her. Brooks, he said. Reyes. She looked at him steadily. You've been in Seaside for 14 months. 16, he said. I used a friend's address for the first two. Why? He put his hands flat on the table and looked at them for a moment. They had the look of hands that had done difficult work and still remembered it. Because I knew this day was coming eventually, and I wanted to be close enough to move when it did. He looked up. I've been waiting for someone to open the Crestline file for 8 years. When the audit flag hit the system, I had a contact who flagged me within 24 hours. Farron spoke from the window. Who was the contact? Reyes looked at him without expression. Someone who owed me. That's all I'll say about that. Farron nodded once, filing it. Tell us about the files, Doyle said. Reyes looked at Olivia again, and she understood that he was going to direct most of this at her, not at Farron or Doyle. He'd been carrying this for 8 years, and she was the person in the room he trusted. Day 11, he said. You know what you saw. Tell me what you saw, she said. He took a breath through his nose. Morrow and I were on the eastern perimeter. The indirect fire, the sequence that killed him, it wasn't indirect. Not entirely. He paused. There was a call made from our net, internal, 12 minutes before the fire. Morrow had picked up something on the secondary channel, traffic that didn't belong to our operation, didn't match any of our call signs. He flagged it to me. We reported it up the chain. The room was very quiet. You reported it to Weiland, Olivia said. Yes. And 12 minutes later. Yes. Reyes looked at his hands again. I've run the geometry of it in my head 1,000 times. The angle, the timing, the fact that Morrow was the one who found the traffic and reported it. He looked up. Weiland knew what Morrow had found, and Morrow died in the same window in which someone could have passed our position to whoever was generating that traffic. Farron moved away from the window. That's a significant accusation. I know what it is, Reyes said flatly. I've known what it was for 8 years. I also know that I was a corporal, and Weiland was a major, and the only other person on that team who might have corroborated what Morrow found was Brooks. And by the time we were extracted, the secondary channel traffic had been attributed to equipment interference, Olivia said. Yes. I saw that in the operational debrief. She said it with the specific quiet of someone saying something they'd carried a long time. I questioned it. I was told it had been reviewed and classified as equipment error. It wasn't equipment error, Reyes said. Morrow found real traffic on a secondary channel that shouldn't have been active on our net, and Weiland told someone where we were. He said it plainly, without melodrama, which was worse than melodrama would have been. I've lived with that. For 8 years, I've lived with being the only surviving person in that position with that information, knowing that whatever Weiland's reasons were, money, ideology, operational compromise, I don't know. A man I served with is dead because of it, and his death was written as an accident. The room was silent for a long time. Olivia looked at the table. She thought about her field report, friendly coordination failure, which had been what she could prove, which had been accurate as far as it went, which had not gone far enough because she hadn't known what Reyes knew. She thought about how close she'd been to the full truth for 8 years, and how specifically she'd been kept away from it. Weiland's files, Farron said. The physical files he removed from the base. Do you know what they contained? I know what they should have contained, Reyes said. The secondary channel traffic logs from day 11. Morrow wrote it down. The call signs, the frequencies, the timestamp. He was thorough. He always was. He paused. If Weiland kept a physical copy of those logs, it's because he needed leverage, either against whoever he was working with or against the possibility of something like this happening. He looked at Farron. If you find those files, you'll find the traffic logs, and the traffic logs will tell you who was on the other side of that secondary channel. It took 4 days. They found Weiland in Vancouver, British Columbia, at a rental property arranged through a third party, which would have been more effective if the third party hadn't been traceable through a financial chain that the federal investigative team unraveled in about 18 hours. The international process was slower. Coordination, jurisdictional agreements, 48 hours of documentation Olivia wasn't privy to. But Farron kept her informed at regular intervals, and on the 4th morning he called with a specific flatness in his voice that told her before the words did. He's in custody, Farron said. Canadian authorities detained him last night. Extradition proceedings are initiated. His legal team filed an objection this morning, which is standard, and which won't substantially delay the process. The files. He had them. Physical copies of the secondary channel traffic logs from day 11 of Crestline, along with documentation of 3 separate financial transfers from an account that connects to a foreign intelligence-adjacent organization active in the region at the time of the operation. A pause. He wasn't just negligent, Olivia. He wasn't just protecting himself from a bad call. He was compromised before the operation began. The financial transfers start 14 months before Crestline. Morrow found the traffic, and Weiland passed the position because Morrow was about to expose that Weiland had been running as an asset. She was standing on the back porch when he told her, and the October air was off the water and very cold, and she stood in it and let it all settle. 19 years of service. The specific weight of knowing that a man she'd served alongside had been sitting across the table from all of them, giving orders, running operations, attending debriefs, while being owned by the people they were working against. The specific violence of Dale Morrow being killed not by operational hazard, not by the friction of a difficult mission gone wrong, but as a deliberate elimination of a threat to a man who should never have been in command. "When does this go public?" she said. "The charges will be filed within the week. Once extradition is complete and the financial evidence is formally entered into the federal record, the court proceedings are public." Farron paused. "It will be covered." "I know. Your name will come up. Your original field report is central documentation." "I know that too." "How are you doing with that?" She thought about it honestly, which was more than she would have done 8 years ago. "I'm not sure yet. Ask me after the week." She went inside and told Ethan in broad terms. Weiland in custody, the files recovered, the charges coming. He listened with the careful attention he'd been bringing to all of it since Tuesday, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Dale Morrow's daughter," he said. "The casualty file will be revised. Formal process, probably 2 to 3 months, but the revision will happen." She sat down at the kitchen table. "Farron gave me his word." Ethan nodded. He was looking at the table in the way he did when he was processing rather than disengaging. "And Reyes. His testimony goes into the federal record. Farron is working on getting his medical discharge reviewed. There were questions at the time about whether the discharge was influenced by Weiland's desire to remove him from active service. If that review finds what I think it'll find..." She stopped. "Anton Reyes should never have been discharged. He had information that made him inconvenient, and inconvenient people get managed in various ways. His way was a medical board. Can they fix that? They can try." She looked at her hands. Sometimes trying is all there is. The formal charges against Colonel Peter Weiland were filed on a Thursday, 8 days after Ethan's benefits visit to Raven Harbor. The federal filing was public record, and the coverage started within hours. Not front-page national, but significant. Military channels, defense journalism. The kind of coverage that reaches specific audiences with the specific weight it deserves. Former Special Operations Commander charged with espionage and obstruction, linked to death of operator during classified mission. Olivia read the coverage on her laptop at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that she didn't drink, going cold beside her. Ethan sat across from her doing the same thing on his phone. They didn't talk about it much. The reading was enough. The charges against Weiland were specific: conspiracy to commit espionage, obstruction of a federal investigation, falsification of military records, and conduct unbecoming an officer. This last one catching on the detail of the traffic logs and the financial transfers, and the specific documented fact that he had known a member of his team had identified a breach and had used that knowledge to arrange that team member's death. The criminal accountability was federal. The military accountability was concurrent and separate and would proceed on its own track regardless of how the criminal case resolved. Lieutenant Marcus Hale's disciplinary proceedings were quieter, but no less real. The formal hearing had been scheduled, and in the intervening days, 3 additional claimants from his case history had come forward through the audit process. People who had been denied, flagged for fraud, or coerced into dropping legitimate claims over the past 4 years. The count was now 23. Olivia read the number and felt a specific tiredness. Not at the scale of it. She'd expected the scale once the review started. The tiredness was simpler than that. It was the kind you feel when a thing you've suspected is bad turns out to be worse. And you're right, and being right provides absolutely zero comfort. The Hale hearing would result in formal findings. His commanding officer had already suspended his processing authority pending outcome. The 23 cases were being reviewed and resolved individually, each one requiring its own specific correction. Benefits reinstated, records cleared, fraud designations removed. Bureaucratically complex, practically simple. Somebody had treated 23 people badly, and now someone else was spending significant hours fixing what he'd broken. Ethan's case was first in the queue because it was the case that had opened the review. His file was already clean, had been clean since Tuesday afternoon. But the formal documentation of the review, when it arrived in the mail on Thursday evening, a thick envelope with the Naval Processing Center's return address, was the first piece of paper that felt like an ending to something. He held it for a while before he opened it. Inside, a formal letter of correction, a revised benefits confirmation, a separate letter from the Office of Naval Standards acknowledging that the original handling of his claim had been improper and that corrective action had been taken. 3 pages of bureaucratic language that, stripped down, said, "You were right, he was wrong, and we know it." He set it on the table and looked at it. His mother was watching him from the doorway. "It's weird," he said. "What is?" "It doesn't feel like more than it is. I thought it would feel like more." She came into the kitchen and sat down and looked at the letter with him. "It's paperwork," she said. "It's important paperwork, but it's a document. The actual thing, what changed, what happened, that already happened. The paperwork is just the record of it." "I know." He turned the letter over. The back was blank. "I guess I expected the record to feel different than the thing. It usually doesn't." He looked at her. She was tired. She'd been tired all week, a different kind of tired than he was used to seeing on her. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd been running too long, but the particular tiredness of someone who'd put something down after 8 years and their arms didn't know yet how to feel without the weight. "Mom," he said. Thank you." She looked at him. "For Tuesday," he said. "For all of it. For doing what you did when you could have just, I don't know, made a call and resolved it quietly and gone back to the feed store and not pulled any of this into the open." She was quiet for a moment. "What Hale did to you wasn't minor. What was behind it wasn't minor. And what was behind that—" She stopped. "None of it was minor. Some things shouldn't be resolved quietly." He nodded. He was thinking about something. He turned the letter over again and smoothed it against the table. "You said yesterday you weren't sure how you were doing with your name being part of the public record. The charges. The coverage. I said ask me after the week. It's Thursday." She considered it with the particular honesty she'd been extending to him since Tuesday. "I'm adjusting. It's strange to have done something and had it be invisible for 8 years and then have it be visible. Both states feel wrong in different ways." She turned her mug in her hands. "The report I filed in the field, I knew it was accurate. I knew it was superseded. I lived with the fact that the accurate version didn't exist anywhere except in my memory for a long time." She looked at the table. "Now it exists. In a federal investigation, in the primary documentation of a major prosecution." She shook her head slightly. "It's not satisfaction. It's more like a correction. Like something was at an angle for a very long time and is now at the correct angle. And the correct angle is uncomfortable in its own way because you've adjusted your posture to the wrong one." Ethan thought about that. "You'd adjusted. We both had." She looked at him. "The whole shape of your life, what you knew, what you didn't, what you accepted without asking, that's adjustment too. Not your fault. Mine, mostly. But it's real." "It's been a strange week," he said. "Yes." She almost smiled, not quite. "That's one way to put it." On Friday morning, Farron called with 2 things. The first was that Weiland's extradition had been confirmed, and he would be transferred to federal custody by the end of the following week. His legal team's objection had been reviewed and denied. The physical files he'd removed from the base were in federal evidence. The financial documentation was, according to the prosecutorial team, more extensive than initially assessed. The 14-month period prior to Crestline was now confirmed as part of a longer pattern, potentially going back several years before that operation. The second thing was about Anton Reyes. His medical discharge review came back faster than I expected, Farron said. The board found that his discharge evaluation was influenced by a commanding officer recommendation, specifically Weiland, that was not consistent with his medical findings at the time. The recommendation overstated the severity of his condition and understated his functional capacity. A pause. The discharge has been reclassified. He's entitled to full separation benefits retroactive to the discharge date and a formal correction of his military record. Olivia sat with that for a moment. 4 years of nothing, living in a coastal rental, watching and waiting for a file to open, a prepaid phone and a message left on a teenager's voicemail. 16 months in Seaside, close enough to move when the moment came. Has he been told? She asked. This morning, he asked if you knew. I told him I was calling you next. Is he all right? Farron took a moment. He cried, he said, which is not information I'd usually pass along, but I think in this case it's relevant. She pressed her mouth together for a second. It's relevant, she agreed. She hung up and found Ethan in the hallway, jacket on, backpack over one shoulder, about to leave for school. Because life was continuing at its unreasonable pace and the world kept requiring ordinary things alongside extraordinary ones. Reyes gets his benefits, she said. His discharge is corrected. Ethan stopped with his hand on the door. Good, he said. And then, with the particular economy of someone who means more than they're saying, that's really good. She nodded. He opened the door and stepped out into the gray October morning, and she watched him go down the porch steps with the printed benefits letter folded in his jacket pocket. He'd put it there that morning without being asked, which she'd noticed and not commented on, and she stayed in the doorway until he turned the corner at the end of the block. She went back to the kitchen and sat down with her cold coffee and the open laptop and the coverage that was still running, and she was reading through the secondary reporting. A defense journalist who'd gotten access to the extradition filing and was laying out the financial timeline in methodical detail, when her phone rang again. Unknown number. Not Oregon area code this time. She looked at it for one full ring, picked up. Mrs. Brooks? A woman's voice. Young, slightly unsteady in the way voices get when someone has been working up to a call for a long time. My name is Nadia Morrow. Dale Morrow was my father. A breath. I don't know if you knew him well. I saw the news this morning and I found your name in the filing and I looked up the number and I wasn't sure if I should call, but She stopped herself, started again, more controlled. I was 6 when he died. I'm 14 now, and I just need to know, did he know? When he found whatever he found on that channel, did he know what it meant? Olivia closed her eyes for 1 second. Yes, she said carefully. He knew it was important. He acted on it immediately. He reported it through the correct chain, the right way to the right people. She paused. He was doing his job exactly as he should have been. He was thorough, and he was right, and he was brave. A silence on the line, long enough that Olivia could hear traffic somewhere on Nadia's end. A street. An ordinary day. Okay, Nadia said. The word was very small and carried a great deal. Okay. Thank you. She hung up. Olivia sat with the phone in her hand and the cold coffee and the open laptop and the quiet kitchen for a long time. Then her phone buzzed once more. A text from Farron, 4 words. One more thing. Tonight. She looked at it. 4 words, and the particular shape of them. Not we need to talk or call when you can, but the specific compression of someone who had found something and was choosing not to put it in writing made her stomach go tight in a way that she recognized. The week was not over. Whatever Weiland's files had contained, whatever the financial timeline was revealing as they went deeper into the documentation, it hadn't finished opening. She typed back, "What kind of thing?" His reply took 3 minutes. When it came, it was 2 words. Crestline wasn't first. She read it 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it, she understood it immediately, in the visceral way you understand something you've half known for a long time without letting yourself look at it directly. She read it 3 times because she was deciding what to do with the understanding before Ethan came home. She called Farron back. He answered on the first ring. How much time do you have? Ethan's at school until 3. That's enough. He took a breath. The financial forensics team finished the secondary analysis of Weiland's accounts this morning. The pattern we identified, the transfers, the foreign account connections. They don't start 14 months before Crestline. They start 4 years before it. A pause. There are 2 prior operations in the documentation, both classified at the same tier as Crestline, both with anomalies in their casualty and incident reporting that were never formally reviewed. How many people? 3 deaths across the 2 operations, all listed as operational environment casualties, all now flagged for reinvestigation. He stopped. Olivia, Weiland was compromised for the better part of a decade. Every operation he commanded during that window is now under review. The prosecutorial team is calling it systematic, not a single bad decision under pressure, not one moment of weakness. A sustained, deliberate pattern of selling operational information and managing the internal consequences. She sat with that. The October light through the kitchen window was flat and pale, and the coffee beside her had been cold for an hour, and she was thinking about 3 more deaths written incorrectly in 3 more files, 3 more families with the wrong version of the story, and how a man she'd served under had been doing this across years of operations, and nobody, not her, not the system, not any of the oversight structures that were supposed to catch exactly this, had caught it until a cross-reference audit flagged a documentation discrepancy in a dormant file. The 2 prior operations, she said. You were not involved in either. Weiland commanded both without you on the team. She exhaled slowly. Not relief exactly, just the release of a specific tension she hadn't known she was holding. The families, she said. The JAG office is building a notification protocol. It'll take several weeks to do it correctly. Verification, record review, coordination with casualty affairs. Farron's voice was careful. But it will happen. All 3 will be reviewed and corrected. The full scope of it will be part of the public prosecution record. And Weiland faces 3 additional counts of espionage and 3 additional counts of falsification of records, on top of the existing charges. He paused, and the pause was deliberate. He's looking at the rest of his life, Olivia. There's no version of this where he walks. She looked at the wall, at nothing in particular, at the years stacked behind her and the shape of what she'd carried and how it had fit into something much larger than she'd known, and how that knowledge felt not vindicating exactly. Heavier than vindication. More complicated. Okay, she said. Okay, he echoed. There's one more thing. The Pentagon's Inspector General is opening a systemic review of the oversight failures that allowed Weiland's conduct to go undetected. They want your testimony, not as a subject, not as a witness to a specific incident, as someone with direct operational experience under his command who can speak to the environment he created. He cleared his throat. It would be voluntary. It would be on the record. It would likely become part of whatever policy recommendations come out of the review. She thought about it for a long moment. When? We have time. Months, probably. The review is just initiating. He paused. You don't have to decide now. I know. She picked up the cold coffee and then put it back down. I'll do it. I thought you would. She hung up and sat in the quiet kitchen and let the full weight of the week settle over her. All of it, from Ethan's phone call on Tuesday morning, the benefits form and the plastic chairs and Hale's particular brand of contempt. Through the dogs in the hallway and the phone on the desk and Farron's office and Rhea's in Seaside and Nadia Moro's voice on the phone asking if her father had known what he'd found. The chain of it. The extraordinary, improbable chain of it, starting from a 17-year-old with a clotting disorder and a folder his mother had organized with handwritten tabs. She thought about what she'd told Ethan on Tuesday in the SUV when he'd asked why she'd brought 212 dogs to a naval processing center instead of making a single call. Because making one call and having it resolved in an hour doesn't stop him from doing it again. She hadn't known, when she said it, that Hale was one end of a thread that ran through 8 years of her own silence and out the other side into something she hadn't known the full shape of. She'd just known that quiet resolution was a trap that looked like efficiency, that some things needed to be opened rather than managed, that the cost of keeping things small was paid, eventually, by people who couldn't afford it. She'd learned that lesson a long time ago, in a field at the end of a deployment, standing over a casualty report that said the wrong thing, trying to calculate whether she had enough left to fight it. She hadn't then. She did now. When Ethan came home at 3:15, he found her at the kitchen table with the laptop open and the legal documentation for the expanded charges laid out across the screen, and she told him about Crestline not being first with the same careful, factual honesty she'd been extending to him all week. He listened. He asked 2 questions: how many, and were the families going to be told? And she answered both, and then he was quiet for a while in the way he got when he was processing something large. 4 years before Crestline, he said finally. That whole time you were still serving. Yes. You were in operations he commanded. Several. She looked at him. I've been going through what I remember, what I noticed, whether there were signs I missed or dismissed. She was honest about this too, which was the harder version of honesty. There were things I questioned at the time, operational decisions that didn't sit right, reporting that felt off in ways I couldn't specifically articulate. I filed it under the general friction of difficult command environments. You couldn't have known. Probably not, but I'll spend some time wondering anyway. That's how this goes. She looked at the screen. You don't get clean edges on things like this. You get the truth, and then you live alongside the truth, and living alongside it isn't always comfortable even when the truth is better than what you had before. Ethan thought about that. He pulled out a chair and sat down, dropping his backpack against the table leg. The Inspector General review, he said. You said yes. How did you... She stopped. You were listening from the hallway. He didn't look remotely apologetic. I was getting a glass of water. In the hallway. The kitchen was occupied. He met her eyes. You said yes. Yes. Good. He said it simply, without elaboration, like it was obvious, like he'd expected nothing else and was simply confirming the expected thing. She looked at her son, 17, watching her with the steady eyes she'd always recognized as her own inheritance to him, the specific quality of attention that didn't flinch from difficult information and didn't perform ease it didn't feel, and thought about all the years she'd spent trying to give him a childhood with clean edges. Ordinary mornings, homework at the kitchen table, the pretense of a life that didn't contain the things her life contained. She'd done it out of love, and she'd done it out of cowardice, and she'd done it out of the genuine belief that protection meant keeping the difficult things away from him. And he'd grown up careful and watchful and perceptive in exactly the way children do when they sense the shape of something being kept from them without having the shape named. She hadn't protected him from any of it. She'd just made him experience it alone. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her. For the years of not telling you, for making you navigate things by yourself because I thought I was keeping you safe and I was... She stopped. I was also keeping myself from having to watch you know the truth. And those 2 things got tangled and I told myself they were the same thing and they weren't. He was quiet for a moment, then, I know. I know you know. I mean... He turned the coffee mug on the table, the one she'd left there from the morning. I know why you did it. I've been angry about it this week, a little, but I understand it. He looked up. You came back every time, that was the thing. Whatever the gaps were, whatever wasn't explained, but you always came back, he paused. That's not nothing. She looked at him. The October light was coming through the window at a lower angle now, late afternoon, the kitchen going golden in the way Oregon afternoons do in fall, when the clouds break briefly and everything is briefly, specifically beautiful. No, she said. It's not nothing. The following weeks moved with the particular rhythm of aftermath, not slow, but different in texture from the acute intensity of the week that had preceded them. The machine of federal prosecution ground forward with the impersonal efficiency of large institutional processes, filings, hearings, continuances. The incremental public documentation of Peter Weiland's systematic betrayal. His extradition was completed on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Ethan's visit to the processing center. A coincidence in calendar that Olivia noted without assigning meaning to. He was transferred to federal custody in Oregon, arraigned the following morning, and the hearing was covered by the defense press and 2 national outlets that had picked up the espionage angle. The charges in the public filing were specific and detailed in the way that federal espionage charges are when the evidence is overwhelming. Conspiracy to provide material support to a foreign intelligence operation. Falsification of official military records with intent to obstruct, conduct resulting in the death of a service member, and 6 additional counts across the 2 prior operations. His attorney entered a not guilty plea at arraignment. It was, in the assessment of anyone who had read the financial documentation, a formality. Weiland himself said nothing publicly. He was 54 years old and looked, in the courtroom photographs that ran in the coverage, like a man who had spent 20 years building something and was watching it come apart with the particular expression of someone who'd understood for a long time that this was always how it ended. Not surprise, not defiance. Just the specific exhaustion of someone for whom the performance is finally over. Olivia read the coverage the morning after arraignment and then closed the laptop and went to work at the feed store, which was what she did on Wednesdays. Bert Calloway came in for mineral supplement for his goats, and they talked about the weather and the price of hay, and he asked how Ethan was getting along, and she said well, and she meant it. The ordinary world had not stopped being ordinary while everything else was happening. It didn't know how to. Hale's disciplinary hearing concluded on a Friday, 6 weeks after the initial conduct report. Olivia wasn't present for it. She'd submitted a written statement during the review process, which was entered into the record, and that was the extent of her required participation. The findings were issued the following Monday. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, formally reprimanded for abuse of processing authority, conduct unbecoming, and deliberate obstruction of legitimate benefit claims. His processing authority was permanently revoked. He was reassigned to a non-public administrative function pending a mandatory review of his fitness for continued military service, the outcome of which would determine whether he faced further separation proceedings. 23 cases formally corrected, benefits reinstated, fraud designations removed, records cleared. Each correction documented individually and entered into the permanent record of the review. Doyle sent Olivia the findings summary by email with a 1-line note. Thought you'd want to see this directly. She read through it at the kitchen table. All 23 names, all 23 corrections. Ethan's was first on the list, as it had been since the beginning. She read his name in the formal document. Claimant, Ethan Brooks, age 17, dependent of classified service personnel, benefits claim improperly denied and fraudulently designated, correction effective immediately and retroactively. And there was something in seeing it written in the flat language of institutional accountability that the form they'd carried home hadn't fully captured. This was the record. This was the thing that would exist in the file and in the institution's accounting of itself. Not just the correction of his specific claim, but the formal acknowledgement that the person who denied it had been wrong, had acted improperly, and had faced specific consequences. She thought about what she'd told Ethan in the SUV. Making one call and having it resolved in an hour doesn't stop him from doing it again. The report does. 23 cases. The report did. Anton Reyes came to Millbrook on a Thursday in November, 3 weeks after his discharge was reclassified. He called first, which Olivia appreciated, and she made coffee and they sat at the kitchen table, the same table where most of the significant conversations of the last 6 weeks had happened, which she'd started to think of as the table where things got decided, which was probably too much significance to assign to a piece of furniture, but wasn't entirely wrong. He looked better than he had in the facility in Ashford. Still thin, still the limp. But he'd gotten a haircut, and he was wearing clothes that fit, and there was something in his posture that was different, not lighter exactly, but less compressed, like he'd been braced for something for a very long time, and the thing had finally passed, and his body was slowly remembering how to stand without it. They talked for 2 hours, not about Crestline mostly, about what came next, which for Reyes was genuinely unclear and which he was, to his credit, honest about. He was 46. He had retroactive benefits and a corrected record and no particular plan. He'd been living in a holding pattern for 4 years and the holding pattern had just ended and the horizon was unfamiliar. "What did you do before?" Olivia asked. "Before the service?" "Before Crestline, when you were still active." "K9 handling," he said. "Military working dog program. That's how I ended up on the Crestline roster. Cross-specialty assignment, needed a handler with field certification." She looked at him. "Do you miss it?" "Every day." He said it without hesitation, which told her it was true and had been true for a long time. "I was good at it." "You should go back to it." She said it plainly, without the tentative quality of advice you're not sure will be received. The civilian sector. Training programs, law enforcement support, SAR units. There's a lot of work. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. "I'm 46 with a discharge history that is now corrected," she said. "And that connects you to a federal investigation that every serious program in the country is going to know about within the month." She met his eyes. "You're not damaged goods, Reyes. You're a handler with a classified background and a documented record of integrity under significant pressure. Those are assets." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not wrong." "I'm usually not." He almost laughed, which was the first thing approaching a laugh she'd seen from him, and it landed in the kitchen like something unexpectedly good. Ethan came home from school while Reyes was still there. He shook the man's hand with the straightforward quality of someone who'd heard enough about another person to have opinions about them and had decided the opinions were favorable. They talked about the K9 unit. Ethan had questions, genuine ones, about the training and the communication between handler and animal, and Reyes answered them with the specificity of someone who'd spent years thinking about exactly these things and was grateful to be asked. Olivia watched her son and the man who'd spent 16 months in Seaside waiting for a file to open, sitting at her kitchen table talking about dogs, and thought about all the invisible threads that connected people who would never have met under ordinary circumstances. About the specific kind of luck, if luck was even the word for it, if luck could describe something that had cost this much, that had led a cross-reference audit to a dormant file to a processing center, to a conduct report, to a testimony to a prosecution to a Thursday afternoon in November with coffee and the faint smell of coming rain through the kitchen window. 2 months after the arraignment, Weiland entered a guilty plea. His attorney released a brief statement citing the weight of evidence and his client's decision to spare the families of those affected from the extended process of a trial. The statement did not include an apology and did not offer one, which Olivia read as its own kind of admission, a man who had nothing useful to say and knew it. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for February. The prosecution was recommending 42 years. Given the espionage conviction and the conduct resulting in death counts, the federal guidelines supported it. There was no version of the mathematics in which Peter Weiland returned to ordinary life. Farron called her the morning of the plea to tell her before the coverage ran. She thanked him and hung up and sat on the back porch in the cold and didn't feel what she'd expected to feel, which was nothing dramatic, just the quiet finality of a door closing at the end of a very long hallway. Not relief. Not triumph. Just the specific sense of something completing itself. Dale Morrow's casualty file was formally revised 43 days after the arraignment. Cause of death corrected in the official record. From operational environment hazard to unlawful hostile action facilitated by command-level compromise. It was specific language, accurate language, the language that the record owed him and had withheld for 8 years. Nadia Morrow called again the morning the revision was confirmed. Her voice was steadier this time, not without emotion, but with the quality of someone who had been moving through something difficult and was beginning to arrive at the other side of it. "I read it," she said, "the corrected file." "I know," Olivia said. "It says he found something and reported it." "He did. Immediately. Correctly. Exactly as he should have." A long pause. "He would have kept going if he would have kept serving." "Yes," Olivia said. "He would have." Another pause. Longer. "Thank you," Nadia said. I know you did this for a lot of reasons, but I want you to know that for me, specifically, it matters." Her voice was slightly unsteady. "Having the right record. It matters." Olivia thought about the right record, about how much of her life had been organized around the tension between what was true and what was documented, between what she'd seen and what existed on paper, between the accurate version of things and the manageable version. About how much ground those two things could cover between themselves. Years of it, lives of it, whole histories of it. It matters to me too, she said. It should have happened a long time ago. The Inspector General testimony happened in January, in Washington, in a conference room that was larger and more formal than the rooms in Ashford, but had the same institutional light and the same quality of air that has been filtered through a building's systems too many times. Olivia sat at the table across from a panel of 5 people and spoke for 3 hours about operational culture, about the systems that were supposed to catch what Weiland had done, about where those systems had failed and why, and about what it had felt like, specifically on the ground, in the field, in the years after, to be a person with an accurate account of something that the institutional record had decided wasn't accurate. She wasn't diplomatic about it. She wasn't performative either. She spoke precisely and factually, and without the particular self-aggrandizement of someone using testimony to rehabilitate a personal narrative, because she hadn't come to Washington to look good. She'd come because 3 families deserved to have the oversight failures that killed their people documented in a place where they could actually change something. At the end, one of the panelists, a woman about her age with the particular directness of someone who has survived a long time in a difficult institution, said, "You filed the original field report 8 years ago. You were told it had been superseded. What made you accept that at the time?" Olivia looked at her. "I was exhausted," she said. "I'd been injured, I was trying to get home, I had a 9-year-old waiting for me, and the fight I would have had to start to contest that supersession would have taken everything I had left and likely more." She paused. "I tell you that not as an excuse, as information. Because if the system only holds up when the people inside it have unlimited reserves of personal energy and nothing else at stake, that's not a system, that's a bet." The panelist wrote something down. Olivia looked at the room and thought about Ethan in the waiting area outside. He'd come with her, first flight he'd ever taken, sat in the hotel lobby the night before doing homework and eating room service fries and falling asleep in the chair with his textbook open. He was outside now. She'd told him she'd be done by noon. She was done at 11:40. He was standing at the end of the corridor with his phone in his hand and his jacket slightly rumpled and a paper cup of what was probably terrible coffee from the lobby machine. He looked up when she came through the door, and something in his face went from watchful to present. The specific relaxation of someone who has been waiting and is now done waiting. "How was it?" he said. "Hard," she said. "Useful." She looked at him. "The two are not mutually exclusive." "I know." He handed her the second coffee cup he'd been holding in his other hand, which she hadn't noticed until now. "I got you one. It's not good." She took it and drank it anyway. It was not good. "Thank you." They walked out through the main entrance into the January air, which was cold and specific in the way Washington air is, damp, carrying the river, and she thought about the feed store on Wednesday and the benefits form in Ethan's jacket pocket and the ordinary life that was going to be there when they got back to it, which was the same ordinary life it had always been, except that they were going to live in it differently now, with less distance between them, with fewer locked rooms. She thought about what strength actually looked like, which was not what she'd spent 20 years assuming. She'd thought it looked like the capacity to carry things without showing the weight. She'd organized her entire life around that version of it. The self-sufficiency, the composure, the careful management of what Ethan saw and didn't see. The quiet endurance that she'd told herself was protection. But what had actually changed things wasn't that. What had changed things was putting the accurate version on record, even at cost. Filing the conduct report instead of making the easy call. Bringing Reyes in from Seaside and letting him speak. Sitting in Washington for 3 hours and saying the uncomfortable things precisely because they were uncomfortable. Strength that nobody saw was just loneliness with better posture. It didn't stop Hale. It didn't correct Dale Morrow's file. It didn't give Anton Reyes his discharge back. It didn't give Nadia Morrow the record she deserved. Visibility was the thing. Accurate, documented, on-the-record visibility. The willingness to be the person who said the true thing in the room where it would be written down. That was the version of strength that changed the shape of things. Ethan fell into step beside her. They were heading for the metro. She'd looked it up the night before, 7 stops, straight forward, and the city was moving around them at its ordinary pace, indifferent and purposeful, and it would have looked from the outside like nothing in particular. A woman and her teenage son walking out of a federal building on a January morning, not hurrying. "Mom," Ethan said. Did you get what you needed?" She looked at him sideways. The same question she'd asked him in the SUV on the way out of Raven Harbor, which he knew perfectly well, which he was offering back to her with the specific kind of precision that she'd apparently passed down to him along with her eyes. She thought about Weiland in federal custody, about Hale in his reassigned function, permanently stripped of the authority he'd abused, about 23 corrected files and 3 revised casualty records, and an inspector general review that would change the oversight architecture for operations like Crestline for years to come. About Anton Reyes, who had called her 2 weeks ago from a working dog training facility in Northern California, where he'd just been hired as a lead handler, his voice carrying something she hadn't heard in it before. About Nadia Morrow, 14, with the accurate version of who her father was. About Ethan, who had walked into a processing center with a folder of documents and his mother's careful handwritten tabs, and had sat across from a man who'd called him a liar and had not flinched. She thought about the kitchen table, and the porch calls, and the cold coffee, and the 3 hours in a federal conference room, and 19 years of service written in the bodies of her and the people she'd served alongside, and what it meant that all of it, every quiet, costly, imperfectly born year of it, had led here, to a January morning on a Washington sidewalk with her son, who finally knew who she was. "Yeah," she said. "I think I did." He nodded, satisfied, and finished his terrible coffee, and they walked together into the rest of it. Not clean, not simple, not without the complicated texture of real lives actually lived, but together, finally, with nothing between them that the other one didn't know. That was enough. More than enough. That was everything.